All right. So, hello and welcome. My name is Doyle Buehler, and this is the Wikibrands Collective Webcast Futureproofing Series, episode number one. I've got four amazing people as part of this panel: Sharon Moffitt, Sharon McIntyre, Paul Barter, and myself, who will all get to meet very, very shortly. So, just a little bit about Wikibrands. Wikibrands is disrupting the professional services game by becoming one of the first to build an on-demand business transformation company that helps clients anticipate and build better futures for business. We're blending insights, predictions, and debates from seasoned pros who not only think about this stuff, but actually do it as well. The Wikibrand Collective Webcast is a think tank panel, and every episode is different, but we're focused on 5 core topics of transformation, scale, reinvention, future-proofing, and digitalize. And we'll be talking about getting companies to their next chapters through transformation, innovation, and future-proofing. So today we're talking about future-proofing and innovation. So let's meet our amazing guests. Who we got here first? Sean, you want to go first?
Sharon Moffitt. I'm managing director of Wikibrands, and it's a topic I love because I live most of my time in the future. So great.
You live in the future. Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Sean. Sharon,
Hi.
introduce yourself, please.
Oh, thanks. Hi, I'm Sharon McIntyre, and as all of us do here on the panel, I wear a bunch of hats. With respect to this, I'm an innovation researcher and consultant and professor, and my area of focus is really pragmatic innovation. I like to help organizations get out of the hype zone and move into delivering real value with innovation. So it's a space I live in too. Really enjoy it.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. And Paul, let's get on with yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Paul Barter. I'm a management consultant, university prof, and entrepreneur in residence at an incubator. And I'm a little bit over the horizon, so I'm really interested in how technology is going to enable innovation 2-3 years out, and what corporations should do today in order to take advantage of that.
Perfect. All right. Excellent. And my name is Doyle Buehler. As I mentioned, I'm based out of Australia, and I run a strategic consultancy on digital transformation for companies ready to scale. So let's get into the question. Let's start sort of right at the beginning. What is future proofing? Who wants to go with that one?
I was told before we jumped on that I'm usually the first one to step in the void. So
Exactly.
you had a second of silence there. The way I define future proofing, it's something beyond your current business plan cycle, but something that isn't futurism. I know a lot of times it's been coined futurism, and I find the whole area interesting, but I usually find futurists to plan out things that are more than a decade in advance. Nobody ever goes back to their original prediction to see if it ever panned out. And it tends to be very ethereal. And I love Sharon's preamble to this whole discussion about being pragmatic. I find future proofing, in the way I define it, to be a pragmatic look at what's happening in the future, how to anticipate it. And it's as much about the foresights, it's as much about the doing as it is the foresights that get you there. So how does it tie a connection to innovation and getting companies to actually do stuff?
Fantastic. And get ready for the future. Sharon.
Yeah, if I can add to that, when we think about future proofing ourselves, in our careers or what we're doing, and to build on what Sean was saying, it's when we, opportunity meets preparation, right? So it's really making sure that a number of scenarios are considered, that you're ready to be agile and nimble and to be able to be responsive when change happens. And it's not just incremental change, but making sure that you're able to make that leap when you're required to look at a new business model, to look at a new line of business, so that the future doesn't eat your lunch when the market shifts.
All right, cool. And Paul, what are your thoughts on future proofing to start us off?
I'd align with the other two. I would, as a Canadian, though, I have to put a hockey analogy in, and the famous line is, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck will be. And I have the same advice for individuals and corporations and society. Don't train yourself for where the jobs are today. Train yourself for the jobs of the future. Pursue the customers of the future. That kind of thing.
So is it all about that anticipation then and preparing for that? Or if we're all anticipating stuff, are we actually playing the game? Because not every shot that we take obviously hits the net, and we're not going to actually get to every shot. So how does that relate?
Yeah, so I would say that there's lots of different types of innovation, or kind of two major categories, and we need to run our existing business and be really good at that. And for 50 years in schools, we've been teaching people how to do that. But it's also about doing experiments around where markets are going and really understanding how customers are changing, clients are changing as we get increasingly digital in the world.
That's a good point. And are these experiments something that, how often should we be doing it to prepare ourselves for the future? Sean or Sharon, what do you think?
Well, I think innovation is kind of a cultural bent. For my money, it's not a campaign, it's not a project, it's an ethos that hopefully gets through a company. That may seem very trite and jingoistic about my innovation little country that I'm building here, but I find too often companies treat it as something that we do over there, something that we talk about occasionally at a management team meeting, something that is a tactic, or even better, maybe a strategy, but not something that kind of pervades the vision or mission of a company. So I don't know if that's the hidden question behind your question, but I see it as one of the top 3 or 4 levers that companies can pull to actually build value to their business.
Yeah, so they should have that integrated then, is what you're saying. So not just sort of an offshoot. It should be part of the culture to do it basically continuously. Always have that ability to anticipate.
Totally agree with you, Doyle, with the only caveat that you'll probably get vigorous debate even amongst this group of 4 in terms of the how, right? Like many different schools of thought.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. What do you think, Sharon?
Oh. Well, and I think all too often, when we think of organizations that don't have it as part of their culture and suddenly realize that we have to make a shift, or we have to expand our extend our reach in some area of the market, they'll do it through acquisition. And I think we would all agree that that's a fine strategy to acquire innovators and to acquire some innovation. But if it's not part of the strategy and culture, as Sean was saying, we know how often those acquisitions fail, and it is because of culture, because they try to acquire that sense of experimentation and newness, and then fold it right into that other side of the business, that incremental, safe, executing on plan side of the business. So even if you're acquiring, if you don't have those, if you can't have that parallel processing going on and doing it both future thinking and current thinking, even the acquisition strategy tends to fail. And having been acquired a couple of times, and I'm sure we've all been part of that, we see how often that just doesn't work as a sort of a accessory strategy rather than a core strategy.
Right. Okay. Cool. What, Paul? Any comments on that?
I would say that innovation in any reasonable size company, medium or large company, is a portfolio of things you do. So, some of the things you need to do, you need people in the organization that are responsible for, getting incrementally better, taking some cost out, increasing the top line, doing those things. But you also need people in an organization and leaders in an organization that are looking to future-proof the business and looking for where the next opportunity is, and you need them to make resources available in order to do that thing, and have different metrics that you measure people on around those kind of over the horizon activities.
So how do we actually do this then? What should businesses be doing differently to get started, or to make sure that they've got a proper plan in place? How do they integrate it into the culture? I've got so many questions here, but how do they start?
Mm-hmm. If I can add one thing to something that Paul was just saying, I would also say that not only do you have to be beyond the horizon, as if we're talking horizon 1, 2, 3, but I think you also have to have people that recognize moments of disruptive innovation that are actually happening in that day-to-day thing that you're doing internally. I think so often in hindsight, when we look at these, unicorn startups that are, that $1 billion plus valuation, that are changing their industry, and large organizations are looking at them longingly, thinking, gosh, we wish we could do this. When you really look back, almost all of those innovations started as an internal service, a bit of a Band-Aid, something that was required, that incremental thing that they needed, but someone recognized that the market, product market fit and timing was just right. And so one of the things I would suggest is that corporations need to have people recognizing these bright spots of innovation that are happening within organizations that aren't earmarked for those beyond the horizon future things. I think Paul is right. You also need that. But one of the things that I always recommend is that organizations actually have a team that looks for hidden innovation happening within their supply chain, within their organization, et cetera, that timing is right to bring it forward and move it, beyond that horizon one up into that disruptive zone. And certainly Shopify is one of those organizations I always use as an example. When they built a very simple e-commerce platform for an online snowboard company, they didn't have a vision it was going to change, the future. And, that same type of thing happens in organizations. It just doesn't often get recognized. So that's one small thing that I would recommend organizations do.
Yeah. So something like chief innovation officer or something like that. Is that a bit presumptuous as well, doing something like that, or?
Presumptuous, how so?
Well, just that, we're going to focus on innovation. We're going to focus on future-proofing, when potentially, depending on obviously the age of the company, pardon me, they won't necessarily have all those pieces in place. So if you put somebody there, chief innovation officer, saying, go innovate, what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it?
Well, I'll throw this to Paul. It's about getting the portfolio right. Some organizations will have a lot more in that more experimental zone, and some will be delivering, at scale volume, with massive impacts on the success of the organization at a Horizon 1 or Horizon 2. So I think it's about getting the mix right. Paul, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. The other thing is resources, right? Like culture and resources together make a difference. So if you have a large organization that is, pushing to make the numbers on a quarterly basis and squeezing every ounce of cost out of a firm, for instance, you're going to easily make decisions to shut down kind of those next generation experiments that may be the next big business for you. So I think it's important to have, I don't care what the title is, whether it's chief innovation officer or digital or whatever, but somebody that's got the ear of senior leadership or the board that has access to some resources and can make some of those bets, that can defend, those innovative people from the quarterly financial pressure that we're all under.
Yeah, no, that's good. Sean, what about you? What do you think?
I also get in this discussion when we talk about digital, right? There's this chief digital officer role that props up in terms of, do my company need this or not? I find there's a role for somebody like a chief innovation officer. I think when a company is having its first baby steps into getting serious about innovation, it's probably a really good thing to have somebody with some very sharp technical skills with the ear of the CEO. And I also think as somebody is just as a rallying point when you're starting out early, I think that's important. I think the job of a chief innovation officer is hopefully to put themselves out of business, right? Yep. Hopefully it pervades across every division. My old company, Procter & Gamble, just reorganized itself this week across 6 very different divisions, but they're all focused on product. So any of the center of excellence stuff around innovation is now gone within P&G. They're all going to exist within the functions, the product-based divisions that they have, which I think, given the maturity of a P&G, is probably a good thing, right? We don't need a hero chief innovation officer dropping in or parachuting into situations. We need somebody that can actually do the work too.
Right, but it's good to have as a catalyst, as you said.
Yeah.
In those early days, yep.
So is there then like a transition point? Like, obviously, let's make the assumption that startups are innovative. Does everybody agree with that?
The ones that survive are.
I think, yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so where's the transition point then, the inflection where the startup has to mount the future proofing, the continuous innovation to actually continue to survive?
I'm not sure startups need to future themselves. I mean, startups, successful startups have found some kind of product market fit, and their issues then become more corporate issues. Like, how do we scale? How do we get big fast? How do we get resources? How do we sell? How do we market? Those kinds of things.
So what you're saying, Paul, is that once you start an innovation, you kind of continue that, but then that sort of defeats sort of the definition of innovation if you're the same product 10 years down the road.
Well, it depends what the market is. I was out with one of our peers for lunch yesterday, and we were talking about this. And you know, it depends what the market is and what your product is. If the lean startup people will talk about searching for, a continuous business opportunity. But if you have, an invention or an innovation, if you have a guaranteed cost-effective cure for cancer, you don't need to search for anything else. That can be $1 trillion business. You just need to scale.
Yeah. So, but isn't that kind of resting on your laurels, so to speak? It's like, oh yeah, we've innovated. We don't need to innovate anymore. I mean, yeah, we created this massive disruption, this massive innovation, but hey, we're okay because we're a startup and we've survived. Or where does that put that business though?
If I can comment on that, so I'll build upon Paul. It's that you really have to look at the industry they're in and the life cycle, the innovation life cycle of the product or service in question. And so to your point about getting a patent, et cetera, moving out of that, as a pharmaceutical company, as a startup, moving into that, milking the patent, so to speak, or managing that patent over time versus something that's, say, in the gaming or software industry or even in the food industry where fashion industry, there are a number of them where it's that evergreen life cycle. So there's continual iteration and innovation and re-release and releasing, and sometimes of that 0.0 iteration. So it is a step change in the product. They stay in the same industry, but there's more of a continual innovation loop that is either that 0.1, 0.2 incremental or that 0.0 step. So I think that startups can stay in that refreshing and startup mode, but there are also ones, depending on the industry, that they find that market fit and they have that patent protection, and then they move out of startup mode and they move into becoming a managed corporation. But then again, within that, hopefully they're starting, that portfolio approach, and they've got that new project that they're going to be taking some of the rents or revenues that are coming from that more assured thing, and then starting to invest again in those experiments. So it's a continual dance, and it's also just to look at that life cycle of the product and the industry that they're in. But if you are a startup and you just get that one trick pony and you forever manage it, you are no longer a startup, right? You're then a managed corporation.
Right. Okay. But can you still have innovation in that case?
100%. Yeah. It's whether it's incremental or disruptive, and where you're managing your resources. Absolutely. Because that idea of future proofing would hold also for that pharmaceutical company with that cure for cancer. They will have to have something in the pipeline, just not as quick as something like a gaming company would.
I'll just add into Sharon's point as well. I find, sometimes we throw corporates under the bus, and I can't think of people that just kind of go to work not wanting to be their best. A lot of times they either miss the future or aren't thinking about the future as much as they should. But I find what I can accuse corporates of in general is they focus way too much of their time, to Paul's point, on the quarter to quarter, and don't have that portfolio of solutions that go beyond kind of that 6-month horizon. And so I think we're about to conduct some research now that before we even get into the fine art of how do you do it, it's trying to get a common definition of innovation, because we're having a full 20-minute discussion here on this. And I think within innovation in the wild, you'll get 20 different answers from 20 different people in terms of what innovation looks like in their company. And so sometimes innovation is a semantic thing, but I find corporates, the one thing I would say is they do not focus enough of their time and attention on innovation that may impact their business. I guess it's 2018 now. Anything they're working on that should be affecting 2020 is underserviced within kind of the business conversation and resourcing.
Yeah, no, that's good. So what kind of research is Wikibrands doing in that area? Maybe you could shed some light on that.
Well, we've just had evidence today in this discussion of like just some really articulate viewpoints. There's 3 or 4 other of us that are on our subgroup that have pulled together some research. Simply Our Design, we're calling it the Corporate Innovation Playbook. We've got a quant survey that's going out that asks about 35 different questions about this discussion, for anything from what do you get stimulated by, to what schools of thought are we using, to what's the future look like, to who's the best player and what's the best tactics and approaches to use. And then we're going to buttress that with all of that with 30 plus interviews from experts, both people that are practicing and some selected people that we're looking at that are really good at observing what's going on in innovation. And to use Sharon's point again, this is very much a pragmatic piece of research that is focused less on the what. We're going to do a little bit of that, but certainly on the how and the why. And so I'm excited to get that embarked on as we launch this webcast.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sounds good. What are some of the, let's sort of move things along, and we might have to wrap up pretty quick, but what are some of the hurdles that corporations would be feeling when they're kind of making that decision? Let's maybe take it 2 parts. When they're making a decision that, hey, we got to go headlong into this, and then maintaining that innovation.
Who wants to start? We've got a long list. I'll take a start. There's a couple of things that have been
Sharon,
said today.
yeah, let's go with you.
So, short-term, quarter-to-quarter focus. I would say that, a person who's the head of innovation and incubation, there tends to be a 2 to 3 year honeymoon window, and then stakeholders get nervous that they're not contributing directly to the bottom line, and there can be questions about whether that's being effective. Personnel changes at that level, not having that sustained vision. So those would be 3 that I would highlight. Throw it to the guys.
Fantastic. Cool. Thanks, Paul. What about you? Haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, I would say that one of the biggest things that I see is in almost all major trillion-dollar industries in North America and the world, for a long time your competitors came from within your industry. If you were in financial services or automotive manufacturing or you name it, you knew who your competitors were and you knew how to compete with them. I think one of the things that's really different about this time in history is we are seeing the rise of some, exponentially scalable startups that are, entering businesses that were historically impossible to enter because of the costs of infrastructure and et cetera. And we're also seeing at the other end of the spectrum, major global giants, largely coming from the information technology world, the Googles, Amazons, et cetera, that are entering those same businesses as well. So if you look at automotive manufacturing, General Motors knows how to compete with Ford and Daimler Chrysler, et cetera, but they're a little less sure about how to compete with Tesla as a kind of startup, or to deal with Apple and driverless cars. And so, and given that those global giants, for instance, have almost $1 trillion in cash on their balance sheets in aggregate, there's big entities coming for their, immense businesses. And so that's new.
Okay, cool. And Sean?
Yeah, similar to Paul. I mean, I've got a real. I don't think your innovation can escape not being technology fluent. I think technology has had a huge impact on how innovation works, and I think not only from how to do it, but also just the pace at which innovation needs to happen. The average company gets disrupted in about a little bit more than 3 years now. So you think about it. Wow, that really changes your perspective than a 20-year cycle of trying to get your next thing out. I would say one thing that I see a lot nowadays, and I hate to see it amongst corporate innovation, is they maintain a little bit of their legacy thinking in terms of, well, this has got to be proprietary and we're going to do it alone. We're going to do it ourselves. We're going to build a big division called innovation, and they don't network and they don't partner and they don't co-create with their customers for a variety of legal, corporate-based reasons. And it's such the wrong idea. It may seem principled, but it is the absolute wrong way to do it. And I see it way too often here in Canada and elsewhere.
Yeah. Just adding on that, that old-fashioned way of either we acquire them 100% or we build a competitive thing to that other company. I found most of the organizations that are in that corporate multinational space really have a hard time being flexible with how they form alliances, how they run experiments, how they co-create. It's excruciatingly uncomfortable for them to do that, and their lawyers are often recommending you got to buy them, you've got to acquire, you've got to get the IP, rather than letting that experiment or that loose, weak tie relationship play itself out. And there's always this push to acquire or build a competitive function internally. So learning how to be more flexible and experiment with startups and collaborators and supply chain, it's very difficult culturally for many organizations.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool. Very interesting. All right, quickly, last questions. It's hot or hot. What's one company
hot or hot? I think
hot
you
or
mean hot or
hot,
not,
yeah.
right?
No, because we don't have time for the not, just the hot.
Okay.
In your mind, who's the best company that's sort of showcasing innovation, future proofing? Go, Sharon.
The best company.
Yes.
They would be mid-sized companies that I would look at.
Yeah,
So
that's
one
fine.
one I would say would be Lego. It's an
Lego.
organization we know well. I think Lego for sure.
Cool. Sean.
Netflix. I know everybody expects me to say it, but they've been able to evolve their business from the core 4 times over the last 15-year period. They know more about you than you probably know about yourself, and they're just really good at change. They don't get stuck on the innovation kind of, we did it once, let's just stick with it. They keep on doing it every 3 or 4 years.
Fantastic. And Paul, your turn.
Well, I mean, I'm going to pick the easy one, but I've got to say Amazon. It's one day it's a book store, the next day it's the retailer for the world, the next day it's the largest enterprise software company. I just started watching Amazon's videos now. They're a Netflix competitor. They're a competitor to everyone.
Yeah, and that can maybe be a topic of our next conversation is the size of the company as well. Or are they backtracking by going back into retail too? Is that real innovation, or is that like not real innovation?
I think it's experimentation.
Yeah, true. Yeah, good point. All right, cool. Well, let's call it a morning, an afternoon, an evening. Thank you so much. This has been the Wikibrands Collective Webcast, the Future Proofing series. You can go to wiki-brands.com/webcasts to get up to date on all the series that we are producing. As I mentioned before, we've got 5 sets coming out, each with their own episodes. Some great topics. Thank you, Sean Moffitt, Sharon McIntyre, Paul Barter, and myself. We have some other amazing shows coming up as well on Wikibrands Collective Webcast. So go to that website, take a look, listen in, and thank you. And we will see you all online.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.